You're listening to the Sent Ones podcast, where we help disciples of Jesus discover their calling, develop their skills, and get deployed to their mission.
Man, excited to jump into this conversation today. Welcome back to the Sent Ones podcast. Thanks for listening. And just want to introduce and have him introduce himself. Got a friend named Sean who's out in California, and a mutual friend introduced us. And I'm excited, as we were talking beforehand, about some of what he's going to share. But Sean, do you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and especially include maybe your testimony of how you started following Jesus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from the LA area, born and mostly raised. Grew up in a fairly religious household. I grew up Catholic. And for me growing up, though, church was mainly, this is what you do on weekends. And it wasn't until high school that I fell into kind of a youth group, kind of confirmation program where I really started to understand the gospel of grace. So much of my life was about trying to prove myself to the world, prove myself to the Lord. I go to the mass, I say the right things, I don't do the bad things, but it was exhausting. And so when I finally learned that I didn't have to prove myself, that Jesus proved himself for me. And I was hanging out with these 20 somethings who were leading this youth group, and they just had so much joy, so much love for Jesus. And I'm like, I want that. How do I get that? They're like, it's all about this. This is the concept of a relationship. Like, that's what God wants. He wants a relationship with you, and you don't need to prove yourself for it. Jesus did that. That's why he went to the cross, died and rose again. And now all you have to do is receive and accept that. And so and between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, repented, believed, placed my faith in Christ, and then it's been a journey ever since then. But yeah,
that's awesome, Sean. Thank you for sharing that, bro. Man, I would love to hear, how then God took you from that point of your life of surrendering everything to Jesus to now, where you're involved in launching Sent Ones across the world and raising up missionaries that'll go to the nations. What did that journey look like, man? Just briefly, and then tell us a little bit about what you're up to right now.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this quick. And so I went to college at Pepperdine. That's where I met my wife now, and I studied theater. That's what we did together. I was originally an actor. And so from there, I went to grad school in Denver at a conservatory, got married. That took us to New York City, and that was the dream. I was pursuing acting in New York while my wife got into tech, but it was in New York that we really plugged into a church there, really for the first time, and got discipled by a pastor and his wife. And as we were getting connected there, I transitioned into ministry. That's a longer story. About 3 years into New York, started working for the church there. And that was kind of a big decision, kind of to leave acting, pursue ministry. But that's what the Lord had for us. And pretty quickly after jumping into ministry, working for that church, I remember studying the book of Acts for the first time. And as I'm reading that, I'm like, I want to plant a church. I don't think I just want to plant one church. I think I want to plant hundreds of churches, because that's what I see here. And at the time, the guys that I was kind of running with, they're like, I don't know what to do with that. What do you mean? And so that took us on a journey where New York, we love the city. It was getting a little unsustainable for us. We had our first kid there, living in our small 400 square foot studio apartment in the Upper East Side, trying to figure out life while my wife's working crazy tech hours. And we ended up moving to Austin, Texas, where I pursued a church planting and pastoral residency at a larger church in Austin. And it was there that God lit us up for the nations. It was ironically in Austin for the first time that I'm hearing about the concept of the unreached. The fact that there's 3 billion people around the world that have little to no access to the gospel. And that just kind of blew our minds. I didn't really have any concept for nations or missions really at that point. And now we're being challenged. I remember a guy named Andy Campman, who's now helps lead the organization that I work with, Launch Global. He came up to me as just a lowly church planting resident. And he's like, you feel called to go to the nations? And I said, no. And he's like, well, have you prayed and fasted about that? I said, no. And so suddenly I find myself in their training program, their mobilization program, where for 9 months, they train prospective goers and helping them prep and prepare for the field and discern kind of their calling and where and when. And from there, we actually, for the first time, put our yes on the map. Like, all right, God, we're willing to go. We're willing to go to wherever you'd want to send us. But the Lord had different plans. We've really felt called to the mobilization work. The Lord led us back to LA. After that residency for 2 years, we moved to West LA, where I started working for another church by UCLA with the design and desire to plant a church out of that. And it was then COVID hit, right? So we're talking beginning of 2020, and we got our third kid at this point, and we're like, do we still start a church? And this is when I was connected to guys like Troy Cooper and Puck and Rick there, and they had just moved to the Orange County, Long Beach area. And so started running with them, started training with them, and just really felt like God was calling us to the vision of starting a church in our home. And that vision was not a church that was just going to get bigger and bigger, but a church that would multiply out. That the people we're meeting in LA, a lot of them, they don't want to set foot in church doors, but they'll come to our living room. We're meeting internationals, we're meeting D-church people, whatnot. And so, yeah, just the vision to help others start churches in their homes and see that multiply out. So we did that. And as we were doing that, we did that for about a couple of years on the west side of LA in the middle of COVID, which was its own thing. But from there, the Lord started to burden our hearts for the nations again. And so we're pursuing this local ministry. We're going after it. It's hard. It's good. But we're not moving the needle for the unreached. And so that's when I called Launch Global up again. It's like, hey, how do we get a team in LA? Like, how do we mobilize this city to go to the unreached? And he's like, well, you need some larger churches potentially to start training and sending. And so that actually led us to where we are now in Riverside, California, where we're working a lot with a university called Cal Baptist and a larger church out here that me and my team that we're hubbed in, where we're looking to train and send people there, but also across Southern California to the ends of the earth.
Oh, dude, that's amazing. The one insight I want to share that just hit me from the beginning of your story, but I heard it then throughout, was like, can we all let Acts, like, let the word set our vision?
Yeah.
And we so easily fall into like our culture and even our Christian culture, our American Christian culture of like, well, this is what it's supposed to look like. But I loved how you started that story of you were reading the word. You were like, this is awesome, right? So
Yeah.
I just wanted to give that insight. And then Josh, feel free to kind of take us to the next place. But it's just such a great way to kind of see your story as the word is setting the vision.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, the second piece there, Sean, is, you went through this 9-month journey really putting your yes on the table, right? And we've seen that with so many sent ones and so many people, is that their journey started by just putting their yes on the table. It starts by just saying, Lord, here we are. We're your people. You're our king. You're our Lord. You're going to sit on the throne. You're going to be in charge. And so send me wherever you want me. And for some people, that does end up leading to the nation somewhere else across the world. And for some people, it leads them to a different part of America. And for some people, they stay where they're at, but they make great kingdom impacts locally where they're at. But the key there is surrender. The key is surrendering our desires, our own dreams in order to pick up what God's dream is. And dude, I love this part of your story because it shows that God's dream is always so much better than ours.
That's right. Yeah.
Like God is using you to not only impact the nations personally, but also to raise up many, many, many more people that are going to go impact the nations, which is beautiful, man. Why don't you unpack that a little bit? As a matter of fact, I would love to hear a little bit about Launch Global's journey that they take people on, if you wouldn't mind for a few minutes. Because, part of this podcast is really reaching out to those that do feel called to be sent ones, whether it's locally or globally, those who feel called to be an ambassador and a witness with their lives. And so walk us through, if somebody out there listening right now is beginning to feel stirred in their heart to be a sent one, what does that pathway look like that you guys take people through?
Yeah. So we really look at what we do in 3 buckets. We discover, we develop, and we deploy. And for the most part, we work.
Sean, we're laughing because we use that same language in sent ones. So anyway,
that's awesome. Hey, that's awesome. Great minds. Well, I didn't come up with it, but anyway.
Neither did we.
There you go. It's the Lord. So yeah, we partner with larger churches where there's just kind of a large discovery pool of people that, for the most part, don't have a full grasp on the Great Commission. Like, what does it mean to make disciples of all nations, and what is the reality of the unreached? And so, a lot of our time in kind of building this pipeline is first just kind of educating people, bringing awareness and exposure to the reality of the unreached, where they are in the world, why they're unreached, and the fact that they can play a role in it, whether they're a goer, a sender, a giver, a prayer, a mobilizer, or whatnot, welcoming internationals. And then we've established these kind of 10-week disciple making intensives where we'll just invite anyone and everyone in, and that's just 10 weeks of really getting your feet wet and some of the tools of evangelism, discipleship, and kind of get starting out learning what is the concept of multiplication for fields. We'll cast in vision for the nations for them, and them learning as a team, like, what does it mean to make disciples as a team? Like, we're not called to be lone wolves in this, but we're stretch people a bit. So we're gathering one night a week, and then we're going to pray one morning a week at like 5:30 in the morning, and all we're going to do is pray for the lost and pray for the harvest and pray for the nations, and people love that part of it. From there, we kind of take people into the next step. That's sort of a filter that we use for people that really want to go, that potentially want to take that next step toward the nations. And that's where we do these. The developed portion is really this 9-month residency where we'll have groups of people move into an apartment complex that's hopefully surrounded by a lot of internationals as best we can, depending on the cities that we're in. But for 9 months, they're living with us, with the leaders, ideally, and we're just doing life on life, where we're pressing them, we're squeezing them, and the hope is, as we squeeze them, we're trying to figure out what comes out. Is it going to be sin? Is it going to be Christ likeness? Because when you get to the field, you know you're going to be squeezed in ways that you did never anticipate, and so we want to speak into their life. We want to pour into their character, their spiritual formation, spiritual disciplines. And one of the high values that we have at Launch Global is abiding in Christ. Like, you need to know how to abide. It's abiding that's going to send you. It's abiding that's going to keep you on the field, because we're not just sending people that are going to go for 1 or 2 years. We want to send long-term workers, because oftentimes we may not see fruit until years 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it might take. And so we want people who can endure and last on the field through those hard times. And so then we're praying 3 or 4 mornings a week now. We are really seeing ourselves like a team, like in sort of an apostolic band that's pursuing targets in that local area. We're identifying the internationals. We're knocking on doors. We really want to reach that apartment complex, that campus, or whatever it might be. So we're running after it as far as sharing the gospel, making disciples, and trying to see churches start out of the harvest there. And then we're focusing in on team conflict, things like theology of suffering or spiritual warfare, stuff that you are going to encounter maybe in a different way on the field than you might hear in the States. And then after that, it's 9 months of a big discernment process where we're trying to help people decide, where are you going, when are you going, who's the team you're going to go with, what's the best fit for you, or should you go at all? Because a lot of times stuff comes up in these 9 months, right? When you're squeezing people, the sin's going to come out, right? We want to let's pull all the skeletons out of the closet, because those are the things the enemy is just going to really zero in on when you're on the field. And so if there's something in your marriage, something in your life that might hinder the work overseas, then we're going to press pause. And, maybe they're just a different direction, or people feel called in a different way. But typically we see around 50 to 60% of the people that walk through those 9 months end up on the field within 1 to 2 years. We'll see another 20, 25% stay and mobilize with us, help us run this play, help us send more and pursue the local work. And then another 25% they'll just fold back into the life of the church. They'll stay in their job, but now they kind of have this training, this mindset, and this vision for multiplication and a love for the nations. But we celebrate it all, whether you're going, staying, mobilizing. At the end of the day, it's just obedience to Christ that we're after.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, would you mind unpacking for us maybe one story of somebody who, if there's one that comes off the top of your head, I'll put you on the spot. This isn't something we talked about offline, but
No,
do you have a good story of somebody that went through that ended up going to the nations that you could share with us?
Yeah. So in my first one that I went through, I remember there was a family that we know and love dearly, and they had older kids. And typically when you think about, mobilizable population, you think, young 20s, like flexible, single, young marrieds, right? This was an older family. They had older kids, and they walked in it with us. Their kids were a part of it. They had teenagers at the time, some grade school and some high school. And they were just wrecked by the gospel. They were reading missionary biographies, and these were some of the most holy and faithful people that I knew. And at the time, the dad was working his business job, making good money, and they started taking vision trips overseas. And they in that whole process, they just felt called to the Middle East. There was no, a lot of times we think there needs to be this dream, this writing on the wall, this writing on the chalkboard, like this is where God wants me to go. They didn't have that. They were exploring East Asia. They were exploring, all these different parts. And they end up just going to the Middle East on a vision trip. And it wasn't like, this has to be the place. It was just more, I feel this burden. Like I feel a burden for these people who haven't heard. Like they just don't know the truth about Jesus, and no one is telling them. And so they literally, they sold everything. And we were part of that garage sale. They had to have these big conversations with their kids, because their kids would, are leaving school, they're leaving extracurriculars, they're leaving home. And they end up on the field. They were in one part of the Middle East for a number of years. And then as they're there, they're like, felt that burden for like another part of the Middle East, like, as they're learning Arabic, and now they got to switch up and change, learn a different dialect. And so now they're in a different country there. And they're just one of the most faithful, enduring, and persistent people that I know, who love Jesus, and they're running after it. And I think they come to mind because, this is a family that gave up a lot to go and do, what they're doing. A lot of times I think if you're 20 something years old, you're like, sure, I'll go to the nations for a little bit. I'll go on the adventure. That sounds fun. Let's just rock and roll for a few years, and then I can still figure out my life and career. No, this was a family that already had it figured out. And by and large, they were living a very just good, comfortable life. But they got wrecked by the gospel and by the unreached. And they're like, we'll do whatever it takes. We'll do whatever it takes to see people come to Christ. And so I think seeing them launch and being a part of their story, and we're still connected with them, has been just really just humbling for us, but also really sweet to see.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. The first iteration of Sent Ones, as we were pulling together the site and podcast and blog, we actually had a little more zeroed in on Gen Z, and then we just really realized, like, hey, the call is for anybody to explore like what God wants them to do, right? Where God doesn't just call a specific demographic set, and he gives. That's just such a beautiful story of like, that sacrifice they needed to make. And I saw the logo on Josh's shirt, "Burn the Ship," so it's kind of the same thing when you're putting the yard sale up, right? We're going after it. What would you, maybe it's what you do tell someone, but I would also ask it is, what would you tell someone? I just think of like just the army of potential laborers in the American church, sitting in pews, maybe soft, comfy chairs. It depends on where you're sitting. But what would you tell someone that just at the very beginning, it's just like, maybe I never even thought about it, going, maybe kind of like your own story there, right? In Austin, like I never even thought about the nations. What would you tell somebody just as kind of some starting advice?
Yeah. Man, I think the first things that come to mind, or there's a lot of things that come to mind. But one is get in the word and pray and fast. Like do some word study on the nations. What is God's heart for the nations from Genesis to Revelation? And pray and fast and ask God, like, what do you want me to do with this? Lord, where would you have me go? Connect me with the right people, the right, open doors, whatever it might be. Talk to your local church. Lord, what do they have a vision to send? I remember asking one of our leaders, like, why are the unreached still unreached? What's going on? Like when I first heard about this, I'm like, wait a minute, how is this possible? What is happening? And yet my story is part of the reason. Is people can grow up in the church and they've never heard. Like we're not telling people. One, we're not telling people that there are 3 billion people around the world that are unreached, and two, we're not challenging them to go. it's rare that you hear a pastor, speak over his congregation, I want you to go overseas, or I want you to play a role in this. And so talk to your local church, ask them what's their vision and how can you play a role in that. And then another thing, there's so much content online now. My gosh, like you can take perspectives online. You can, there's other versions of that, whether it's like Momentum Yes, or just look online, look for classes about the unreached. Go to websites like joshuaproject.net. Start learning about what are these people groups, where are they, why are they unreached, what does it take to reach them. And then the last thing I'd say is, man, start putting into practice what you would do. Start sharing the gospel. Start learning to share the gospel. Connect with people that are doing it locally. Develop a burden for making disciples here, because you're not going to get that on the plane, right? We're not. What did David Platt say? It's not preparation by aviation, right? So we want to see people doing the work locally before they do it overseas.
Yeah, and that is such a huge piece. I feel like so many people, I've met young, amazing guys and gals that feel called to some nation somewhere. And I heard a guy say once, it was so funny. I was watching online an event where they were talking to a bunch of young missionaries like that, and he's like, "Listen, man, if you can't," he's like, "You want to go to China? You can't even share the gospel in Panda Express, like."
Yeah,
like,
sure.
and so anyway, his point was like, we've got to begin to live this way locally. Like if we're going to see this stuff happen across the world, we have to be disciples who make disciples where we're at. We've got to be a sent one where we live, work, and play. We've got to begin to live the rhythms of a sent one right here, right now. I love that you continued through your whole story, Sean, to bring up prayer and fasting, and abiding and making sure that our relationship with Jesus is number one in our lives, and that we're
That's
living that lifestyle. I was talking to a guy the other day, and it was more on the business side of things, and he was saying that he went through this business training, and basically they taught them that have your employees write down like their 3 or 4 most high priority items to get done in the day in order, and do number 1 and don't move on to number 2 until number 1 is fully done, and then move on. And he said that it's amazing to see organizations across the world and businesses that the amount of work they're able to accomplish goes through the roof. And the question that I immediately thought in my heart that the Lord pointed at me is, in our lives, is our number 1 priority every day our time with Jesus? Like, is that the thing that gets checked off the list first before we move on to anything else?
Right.
And is time in the harvest one of our priorities at all? Is sharing the gospel one of our priorities at all? Is spending time with our family and pouring into our wife and kids, or spouse and kids, like, is that one of our highest priority items? And so what you're talking about, brother, you're basically helping sent ones get their rhythms of life right and get their heart right, in a context that they're more comfortable with and more familiar with before they go to a context that they're unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible. One huge question I've got for you, Sean, that I think would be incredibly helpful for our listeners to start to protect themselves and prepare themselves a little bit. You guys obviously, as Launch Global, have launched hundreds and hundreds of people across the world. What are some of the major roadblocks that you see that do hinder people from hitting the field? What are those things that, as they go through those 9 months, that consistently pop up over and over again that are just major issues? I'm sure Launch Global has a very a red flag list that they're looking for. What are those big things that keep popping up?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I'll get in trouble if I can't list them all. So no, man, some of the things that come to mind are, I mean, one is just the culture we live in, and just the measure of comfort and complacency that we're drawn to, and knowing that, like, calling people to sell that, to leave that, to give that up and go to the field can be a tough barrier for some. I think also, believe it or not, surprisingly, parents or family members can be challenging when you have these young 20s, young graduates of college or college students that are really processing this call and really wanting to go. And then they have family, they have parents who are saying, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't like the idea of you going to this, hard place or this dangerous place. And really, honestly, that's that we want to educate and give parents a measure of awareness and exposure too. Or like, actually, where your kid might be going isn't as dangerous as you think it is, or where they live now might be more dangerous than where they're going. And then what else? I think that sometimes our churches, they're just, I've noticed specifically in working in New York City and LA, that the cities are so massive and the needs are so big that a lot of the main focus is going to be in the backyard, right? Like the churches in those cities, like I've talked to pastors who are like, we would love to call our people to this and send people to the nations. We just don't have the capacity. We don't have the resources. We're so focused in on kind of where we're at and reaching the poor and marginalized or making disciples locally that we don't have vision for that. We can't have vision for that. And I just think, well, what if you did? What if actually, here's the thing, when we send people overseas, we're training them locally. And so they're pursuing local work as they're being prepared to go. And actually, what if sending actually enhanced the local work instead of it, having to be, one thing or the other? I'm sure there are more barriers. These are a few that come to mind, though.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have to put in a plug because it's come up a couple times, and then I'll kick it to you, Josh, to kind of wrap us up or ask kind of any ending questions. But we just launched, also putting it on sentones.com, a podcast called Unleash the Priest, and it's actually pastors wrestling these same questions. And I just would recommend that to anybody that's kind of having that, like, how can we give our best to the nations, like what's going to happen locally? But just the call of that podcast and the question is like, can we unleash the priesthood of all believers? Can we turn them loose and trust that God's actually got more in store on the other end if we're able to release that? So you've just touched on that a couple times. Obviously you did there at the end, and I just wanted to, we'll obviously throw that link in the show notes, but I just wanted any pastors or church leaders that are connecting are like, that is a barrier. Like, I have a problem with that. I really recommend, obviously, any of Launch Global stuff, but check out that Unleash the Priest podcast. I think that'll be a great fit to start to unpack that from pastors that are wrestling it. But Josh, go ahead and kind of wrap us up with questions or any other things that are on your.
I think before I wrap up, Sean, how can people reach out to you, man, if they would like to, if they want to connect or learn more about what you're doing or get involved? What's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you can email. I think the best email might be sean.lyons, that's sean.lyons @launchglobal.org. And feel free to send me an email and I'll help you get connected to, depending on where you're at. We've got a lot of network around the country and around the globe, honestly. So we can get you plugged in somewhere depending on what you're looking for.
Awesome. No, thank you, bro. So I'll take a few minutes here, guys, to kind of wrap up and pull out a few main points that we've hit on for those of you listening right now. But honestly, guys, Sean's story is incredibly inspiring for us as we really think through what is the pathway that we need to be on, whether it's helping launch people globally or us being launched ourselves to be a sent one globally. What does that practically look like, and how do we need to prepare ourselves, and what do we need to start doing now in order to get ourselves ready for that and to live that way every single day? Sometimes it's super easy, guys, for us to kind of almost think that a missionary is like the Navy SEAL of the Christian world, and that we've got to be like the best of the best of the best we're sending across the world and all of that. The truth is, though, the call upon our lives, man, biblically is the same, whether we live in the United States or globally. We are called to be an ambassador of Christ. We are called to be a sent one. We're called to be a disciple who makes disciples. And so, friends, please don't listen to this and think, well, I may not be called overseas, so I'm like at a lower tier Christian or something because of that. We must be living this way across the world. Like right now where I'm sitting, all around me, the neighbors around me desperately need Jesus. And overseas, there are people who desperately need Jesus. But here's the sad truth, though. Even though we're all called to this all over the world, one thing that Sean just mentioned right here at the very end, and what pastors are wrestling with, like what Feeney said, is that sometimes because our eyes are on everything around us, we lose sight of everything that's happening globally. And I heard an illustration recently that I want to close this out with that I think is going to highlight this really, really well. I was listening to a guy that a friend of mine introduced me to, and he's got a heart for the globe. He's similar to these guys that we've got on this podcast. He's got a heart for the nations. And I was listening to him speak, and this is the illustration he gave, and we'll close with this, guys. But he basically said, let's say I had two children, and they both got lost. And this guy was in the middle of a mega church. I mean, it had like 5,000 seats and all of that. And he said, let's say that my daughter got lost right here somewhere in this church building. I don't know where she's at, but I know she's in the building. But my son got lost out in the middle of like 1,000-acre forest or maybe a 1,000-acre desert with very little people around and very little resources or food or water. And this church said, man, we've got to find these two kids no matter what. We're going to come behind you and find these two kids. And they gave $1 million in order to help find these two children. He said, could you imagine how the donors would feel if I spent $999,999 to find my daughter lost in the mega church building and threw $1 at finding my son who was lost in the middle of 1,000-acre desert or 1,000-acre wood? Could you imagine how crazy that would be and how people would feel? And he said, that's exactly, though, what we're doing globally right now, is that we're spending so much of our time, energy, and resources looking for lost kids that still matter to God and still matter to the Father 100%. But they've got people and resources around them like crazy in order to find them. But there are people overseas in some of these unreached nations that have no one looking for them. They have no one trying to help them and no resources to try to reach them. And so, friend, if you're listening right now, or if you're a pastor listening or whatever, I want to encourage you, what would it look like to radically throw time, energy, and resources, and even yourself, at going after the people across the world that no one is going after? People across the world that if they just wandered for years, they may never find Jesus, right? They may never find the true hope of the gospel. Would you and I take time today to really think and pray and fast about what we can do to either be a sent one globally or help send others globally in order to see this great commission completed in our lifetime? It is urgent, friends. We have people that we are losing every single day to the other side of eternity that have no shot at even encountering Jesus. Would you get involved in being a sent one who sends more sent ones across the world? Let's be disciples who make disciples. Let's live this out wherever we're at, and let's lift our eyes onto the nations where people so desperately need the gospel. Sean, thank you for being here with us, brother. It's been awesome to hear your story, bro. And we really cannot wait to just continue to see what God does through you and with you. And so thanks for being on. For those listening, please come check us out at sentones.com. Go to our Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Feeney always encourages me to say these things, and I always forget all of our handles. But you'll be able to find us at Sent One somewhere, okay? Just come find us, follow, subscribe, like, all those YouTube things you say. And we'd love to have you get involved, man. And if there's any way that we can help you become a Sent One who goes to the nations, just reach out to us and we'd be glad to help. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the Sent Ones podcast. For practical next steps or more content like this, check us out at sentones.com, or you can subscribe with your favorite podcast provider. Hope to see you guys next time.